Hey, good morning, everyone. This is John Much. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of iSheriff, and thank you very much for joining us this morning on our webinar around ransomware concerns for small and medium enterprises. Very, very pleased to be joined by Chris Christensen, Vice President at IDC of their security practice, as well as Oscar Marquez, our co-founder and CTO at iSheriff. And I'll talk a little bit more about those guys and their qualifications. Hey, this morning, what we'd like to try to do is offer some very pragmatic strategies, tips, and techniques, and some thoughts around the growing problem of ransomware. And, as I think everyone is aware, the FBI is now identifying this as increasingly a billion-dollar problem in the small and medium enterprise market. We know that you guys are undermanned and under-resourced in terms of your capability to address the pervasiveness of these types of threats. We're seeing the persistence and the velocity and the techniques behind ransomware increasing and getting more sophisticated, and we're seeing the cost to business escalating dramatically. So let's get into it. We're going to play a little video to kick it off, and then come back and talk very pragmatically. So Ed, roll video.
A hostage and ransom story for the digital age. A medical center in California forced to pay cyber criminals thousands of dollars to gain back control of its computers. It's a trend called ransomware. Hackers infecting computers with malware, then demanding payment from the user to regain access. And as NBC's Tom Costello reports, it could happen to you.
It happened at Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, all of its computers frozen, with hackers demanding $17,000 in ransom payable in online bitcoins to release the computers. Locked out, the hospital CEO says in the best interest of restoring normal operations, we did this. Across the country in Maine, hackers even held the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department computers hostage.
They ask for, we'll gladly give you the code to unencrypt it for a nominal fee.
Even the cops had no choice but to pay up $300 to get their data back.
As this warning is appearing on the screen, they've already encrypted most of the information on your system.
Cybersecurity pro James Line says ransomware is now big business, encrypting corporate and government files, family photos, health records, and financial documents, then demanding payment for the code to unlock them. Becoming a victim is as easy as a bad mouse click on a pop-up window, email, or web link.
This would be the data on my computer I can't access anymore.
Right, any of the files, whether they're photos, Excel files, everything is no longer accessible.
Intel Security reports a 127% jump in ransomware cases in just the last year.
It's a high volume, high speed game that these guys are playing. That's the business model that they're using right now.
To avoid having your data held hostage, security pros recommend updating your antivirus software, enabling your pop-up blockers, and backing up your computer on an external drive. With the hackers often a world away, if you are hacked, you may have no choice but to pay the ransom. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
Obviously the cost in business disruption is super significant, and this morning we're pleased to have Chris Christensen, who is a Program Vice President for IDC Security Products and Services Group. Chris has worked at IDC for 20 years. He founded the IDC security practice in 1997. And he conducts a lot of primary research into the issues that we're facing today. Very pleased to have Chris with us this morning, and with that, Chris, take it away.
Thanks, John. This is Chris Christensen. I'm very glad to be with you, and I've been looking at this ransomware situation for a long time, and it's been around for quite a while. But first, let's reiterate what you heard as a definition. So that on the next slide, we can. This is just a simple point of information. So it's malware that illegally restricts file/system access until a fee is paid. So the key is it doesn't necessarily, encrypt it. There are a whole variety of interesting ransomware attacks. And on the next slide, we see a little bit of the history of ransomware. And so in the late 80s, 1989, PC Cyborg, there's a phony license expiration. File names, the file names were encrypted. So it's not really that new. In 1996, we saw the concept that was discussed in academic security conferences about an attack that would use a public key. In 2006, we started to see cryptoviruses proliferate based on strong encryption. It wasn't until 2013 that this got real serious, and it was a combination of a widely available piece of malware called CryptoLocker and the fact that the payment was required in Bitcoins. So the Bitcoin became really important. That was a key turning point because Bitcoins made this economically viable for the criminals. In other words, they could get paid and have a high level of assurance that they would not get caught. Because previous to this, they were taking credit card payments. The credit card companies would cut them off when they found out that they were paying criminals. Obviously, they didn't want to do that. And the credit card companies were all too happy to turn over any records they had to law enforcement. So this changed the economic situation that now ransomware became a big, viable business with a very low risk of getting caught and a high assurance of getting paid. So that changed. In 2014, we started to see cryptoviruses move beyond just PCs and locally attached storage to network attached storage and the whole website. So that also meant that it was started to expand dramatically from consumer to SMB and even to some large corporations, municipalities, as well as healthcare institutions, as we saw. And that brought us to 2016. The Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center paid 40 Bitcoins, which is at the time was roughly $17,000, to unknown attackers. So that gives you some idea. But the whole key here, when things fundamentally changed, was Bitcoin, because people didn't have to get paid by unreliable, untrustworthy credit card companies that would hand the attackers over to law enforcement. So on the next slide, we can see a little bit about the ransomware attack process. And this is not that brilliant. You can see that typically it's a phishing email. The phishing email is socially engineered, especially when it's going after a small and medium-sized business. It may contain a link that's connected to it, or it may contain what looks like a benign link to a website, which downloads the malware. The user clicks on the attachment of the link, the malware scans for the files and backups, and this is really important, and this is where it gets sort of interesting. We've talked to a variety of people, and it used to be that the malware would just scan alphabetically through all the files. Now we're starting to see that the malware scans for specific executable files, specific backup files. It prioritizes them, and then it sends that priority list and what it's found, and also the mapping of network drives, or even the mapping of cloud-based backups back to the command and control. Command and control is very interested in this information, but its primary function is to generate a key pair so it can encrypt. And the key pair also allows it to theoretically unlock the encrypted information. The malware then encrypts the user files, displays a message, and demands the runtime, and threatens to destroy the files. And it doesn't really destroy the files. What it does is the encryption renders the files inaccessible to the user or to the business. If the key is destroyed, the information can never be accessed again, because cracking the key would take hundreds, maybe thousands of years, at least theoretically, based on this. And we also start to see that the criminals that are dispensing ransomware are now using strong keys, and they're using randomly generated keys. So it's very, very difficult to brute force the keys. So, and this trend continues. Obviously, the success of this breeds many more attacks. We see attacks that are also looking to download those files and extract incremental value out of that, because those files are incredibly valuable. So you can see that. And so on the next slide, the question is, what happens after the attack? And this is generally it's tears, it's recriminations, it's firings, sometimes verbal and physical abuse. Not that verbal or physical abuse are funny, it's just that it can quickly collapse into chaos. If you really want to go through a process, this is some suggestions. First of all, what systems, users, and files were hit? We've heard, especially from larger companies, that this wasn't a big issue because they only had a few files that were encrypted on a local laptop or a PC. The attack was detected, the traffic was blocked, the executable was sandboxed or was quarantined. So it may be that the ransomware attack was relatively small. There were backups, so that is a wonderful solution. The next question is, were the files backed up? Were the backup files encrypted? Or were they, because, by the way, encrypting the files doesn't necessarily ensure that the ransomware couldn't layer its own encryption on top of it. So, just because you've encrypted your own files doesn't necessarily mean that the attackers couldn't add another layer or, take your files and stick them in their own encrypted envelope and render them inaccessible to you. So were the files backed up? Where were they backed up? Was the backups air-gapped in some way? In other words, were they physically separated from the network so the malware couldn't attack them? Recovery. This is an ugly question, easy to ask, very, very difficult to ask. So how much time and money will it take to restore the backups? The other question is, do you have that much time and money before your company, which might be heavily dependent on those customer files, starts the business starts to decay, the cash flow starts to decay, the customers start to desert the business because they no longer trust the business or simply because they can't transact business. So, and that recovery time and money question generally leads to a discussion about whether or not you just pay the criminals for a fast, cheap recovery. Note that's about 35% of the SMBs pay. So, and then finally we have prevention. Will management actually fund defenses? And this seems like an idiotic question, but I would say in at least half the cases, and this is based on just anecdotal conversations with people, in half the cases, the senior management, the board, whatever, decides, nah, it's not going to happen again. Why should we go to a lot of time and trouble for something that's probably only happened to us once? Really stupid conclusion and extremely short-sighted. So, but anyway, so how do you prevent it? Next slide, please. So preventing ransomware, there's huge amount of, this is a huge discussion. There have been, the FBI on its website has some really excellent recommendations on this, very prescriptive, very detailed prescriptive actions. iSheriff in its blogs has some great information about what to look at. And so this is a really rough area. You can literally spend days on this topic and before you have an understanding, and the understanding then has to be customized to your specific business situation. But generally, regular anti-phishing training, I think this is really important for a variety of reasons, not just for ransomware. Rejecting traffic from unknown IP addresses, it's amazing how many companies will accept traffic from places that they have no business in, no interest in. Azerbaijan, for instance, certain countries in the Middle East or Africa. You don't do business there, and you don't have any customers there, and you don't have any suppliers or partners there. Why take that traffic? Backups that are daily or weekly to local disks, network, and the cloud. You want 3 different levels of backup, and you also want to be assured that, and it's very old school, is that somebody actually disconnects the backup drive and takes it home at the end of the day, because ransomware can't hit what it can't find. So make sure at least one backup is stored offline. Like I said, turn on automatic update for all software. Yeah, it's not necessarily going to fix it, but most of these attacks, in fact, most cybersecurity attacks, are based on existing vulnerabilities that patches are already available for, and the problem is that the systems are either not patched, or in the case of older versions of Windows, there are no patches available for it from the company, from Microsoft or other vendors, because they no longer support them. So it's really important that you keep your software current and you turn on automatic update. Disallow registry changes. I saw this in iSheriff blog, and I thought this was quite good, because in a lot of cases, the ransomware malware is changing the registry. And then, once again, another really critical, very simple recommendation that's extremely hard to do is rehearse your file recovery from backup. If you've never recovered from a backup, you're pretty much guaranteed it's not going to work. So, it's absolutely critical that you know how to do this, you know where the backup is, you know who has access to it, you know what the process is, you know the passwords. If you've encrypted your backup, you know where the key is. So just simple rehearsal oftentimes is enormously beneficial. So next slide, please. So futures, this is my last slide. And this is based on what we've seen with other attacks. I've been looking at cybersecurity for almost 20 years. So, the patterns here are that attacks have doubled, ransomware attacks doubled from 2013 to 2014. I would expect that they will double or even triple again once we have the 2015 data. But an interesting trend here happens, and this happened with the advanced persistent threat attacks. The number of attacks, in other words, the volume of the attacks actually went down, but the losses increased. So in other words, instead of randomly attacking, instead of this pray and spray that you're going to hit a target by just spraying attacks out, you're going to start to see that they're much more targeted, they're much better socially engineered, they're after specific targets, and they know those targets are weak in a variety of different ways because they've already profiled them. So they'll become more efficient, and more efficient means the criminal enterprises become more profitable. The margins get better. After all, people are doing this for the money. They're not doing it for yucks or joy or to change the planet. They want to make money, and there's organized companies that are designed to make money. People go to work. You actually can see it in some of the logs. Depending on where the company is located, you can see the activity changed when the normal start time for the day is, when the normal lunch time is, and when they go home. So interesting. So it's a business. We pointed out that it's moving very quickly from consumers to SMB. The FBI has identified this and is quite serious about this becoming a billion-dollar crime, and believing that in 2016 it's going to substantially increase. And once again, it started with consumers, it's moving because it's much more profitable, it's moving to small and medium-sized businesses. And then we're probably going to start to see a greater reliance on malicious links in in legitimate SMB websites, and huge, especially in other parts of the world where people hold on to older versions of PC software. And by the way, it's not just operating systems, it's browsers, and it's PDFs, and there's a whole variety of things that you can attack with this. So older, unsupported PC software, they'll have done the scans, and they'll know where this is. So they're quite effective at building a list of targets where they have a very high level of success, and once again, that leads to better profits and better margins. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to John. Thank you. So I think John might be a little bit delayed. So.
Oh, sorry. I had to click the unmute button. Very key. Sorry. Hey, thank you very much for that, Chris. Really appreciate it. And you saw a flash on Chris's contact information. If you'd like to reach out to him directly, we would encourage that. And, the expertise of these professional organizations like IDC and folks like Chris is critical. When I think about the security problem today in the small and medium enterprise world, there are a few things that come to top of mind. And I've been in the technology industry and the enterprise software space for close to 30 years and in security for about 10. The idea really of security training and education on a periodic basis up front to alert your internal folks to the latest types of techniques, the latest key indicators to be on the lookout for, I think is critical. And when you think about, security in general, you have to make it everybody's issue. It has to be something that's top of mind to everybody internally in the company. And, way on the back end, the idea of the backup offline and having very effective backup procedures, technique, and keeping that data safe. And then obviously in the middle, there are a whole host of things that you can do, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Oscar. And so next slide, Ed. I'm going to just spin through very quickly a couple of things that we're doing. We talked a little bit about the setup of the problem. One of the things that we're seeing is that there are now a proliferation of predictive indicators that a company, an education, or a government organization may be coming under attack. Next slide. And those predictive, we talked a little bit about the size of the problem. Next slide. Don't need to go back through that. The predictive indicators are really occurring over various social media channels. And so things like Yik Yak, a number of social media-oriented channels, we are seeing a noise level and a volume of dialogue that give us the ability to research, monitor, and make a prediction around the increasing likelihood of a threat. We did a webinar on this about a month ago, and we're chatting a little bit about it here because it's kind of a future direction for us, an innovation curve that I think differentiates iSheriff and the way we think about the security problem. So about a month ago, next slide, we partnered with a firm called Soteria Intelligence, and we announced a solution deliverable, which is basically taking some of their social media threat assessment capability, partnering with our threat assessment data that we gather through our big data intelligence console as part of the iSheriff suite, where we know what attacks have been made through email, what attacks have been made on the endpoint, what attacks have been made through URL and web type of spear phishing and attraction techniques. And we build some predictive indicators. And basically what we're delivering is an AI-based threat posture module as part of the iSheriff Complete solution. This is a threat posture score that takes that social media threat indicator and correlates it with our containerization score, our big data engine score, and lets you know on a scale of 0 to 1,000 whether in fact you are under a high level threat environment, whether your threat environment is relatively medium or whether it's relatively low. And so our attempt here is really to alert you to periods of time where you need to be extra vigilant, extra cautious, and raise your security threat posture. We're delivering this module for a couple of dollars per node per month. We are also delivering security training and education along with this module. So we come in, we basically do a tutorial to your company. We have online learning and training material that allow you to self-educate around the ransomware threat, and we deliver that as part of this AI-based module. So any interest in that, let us know, but just kind of updating everybody on where we're going. And with that, I want to turn it over to the main brain trust, Mr. Oscar Marquez, CTO and co-founder of iSheriff, who is going to take you through some of our technology solution stack and how we help you specifically. Oscar?
Hey, thanks, John. Ed, next, please. So I just wanted to sort of run through what we're seeing from the crypto environment and how it actually executes. Chris sort of touched on a lot of this stuff already, but just to give you a quick highlight, what we are seeing is it does pull down, it does do an installation. We are seeing that, we are getting more and more water holing type of attacks where literally you're seeing in Facebook, Twitter, or in multiple server environments that the payload is actually being delivered. So when John talks about really predictive environments around social networking, iSheriff is really thinking about what is the next way of this payload being delivered compared to just thinking about building a signature to actually block an installation from happening. So we really consider contacting the server as one of the main drivers at the moment. Everything does come through a phishing attack or those kind of scenarios. And to John's point before, if you're not really actually training your staff, you're more vulnerable than actually having any protection to start off with. Most of these attacks are click-through attacks, and then they actually execute to try to hit some sort of server in the background. Now, we have been seeing a influx, and it hasn't gotten less, it's gotten more. And we've seen some really crazy types of attacks where once the encryption does happen, we are seeing things like the extortionists are not just using Bitcoin anymore. For example, in Mexico, we've seen them actually use phone card, that you literally pay for the phone card of a $20 phone card due to the fact that you then send them the number of the phone card, and the criminal goes into any store in Mexico because they're not tracked by computer. He puts in that number and they give him the $20 card, and he can cash that card for cash. So we've seen those types of environments from a payment environment. We've also seen in Nigeria their online phone banking. Nigeria probably has one of the best phone banking environments today. One of the issues Nigeria does have, it doesn't really track the way the expenditures happen due to the fact that they allow transfers of money to happen in real time, which is really great. But at the same time, if you're actually getting an extortion environment and asking you to go online to EcoBank in Nigeria and add $100, you've literally made the guy's year, because that money cannot be tracked. They instantaneously spend the money, and they spend the money in organized crime internally. So then there's no way of actually tracking the money actually ever touching anyone's bank account. So they actually convert the money into goods. And we've seen a lot of that happening, and we're seeing it change constantly. I think in the next couple of months, we're going to start seeing different types of attacks from different types of extortion environments. We went from really a huge organized crime environment to copycat environments, and we're now starting to see very petty crime type of environments as well. Ed, next slide, please. So we have started to see the attacks on the rise. Are we doing a good job? I think we are doing a good job when it comes to blocking phishing and blocking all these types of scenarios. What we're doing a really bad job of, like I said before, is really having the expertise in-house, especially in the SMB market, where people aren't really training their staff downstream not to be doing click-throughs and stuff like that. And you are seeing a percentile getting through. Now, when we see the average, what we've seen so far is an average of $250, but we've actually seen attacks where they've actually gone through with $3.50. So it just depends on how widespread they're going to do it or how targeted they're going to do it. We've seen also the change from trying to hit 30 machines or every file on the network to actually downstream right to one file. Due to the fact that the phishing attacks are getting more complicated, where they're actually, to Chris's point earlier, they're trying to pull a MAC address, they're trying to pull a different type of file structure, or just a plain text password, which we actually saw last week, where the payroll ERP person was targeted directly. She had a plain text password saved on her desktop. It literally allowed them to encrypt their CRM, their ERP system internally. And the only issue they had there is their backup was 3 days late. And one of the things we've actually seen as well is that even though you're going to try and you pay these guys, you're better off formatting if you have a backup and starting from scratch. I would recommend never to pay. The only issue you're going to find, which we've seen twice now, is the customer has paid, and for whatever reason, they've had corruption in the file structure, which is very strange, especially from an unencryption key. But again, you have to keep in mind that these guys do not have a formulated software testing environment. They are just trying to get out as hard as they can. So attackers are receiving a lot of money. They're getting further and further past, and no one's going to jail, right? And we're seeing this. We pass a lot of information to different organizations in regards to, from police, FBI, etc. And what we are seeing that you cannot just go into this world today trying to block this types of structures with a signature or some sort of behavior environment. Next, Ed. Where does Sheriff differ? I really didn't want to go into a product presentation. I just wanted to give you a high-level understanding. Next, Ed. And just understand how Sheriff works from, we have touch points across the world. We have 35 plus data centers around the world. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of touch points around the world, everything from an endpoint to a user hitting the web or an email. To Chris's point earlier, our perimeter has disappeared. So today, you know, we are a cloud provider, but one of the realities we see is that the endpoint is a moving target, the browser is a moving target, email is a moving target. And if you don't have visibility across those type of environments, you find it extremely hard to try to actually counterattack anything that's happening to that customer. Now, Sheriff has our threat detection engine, which is really our big data neural environment. We collect from every type of data structure that comes through our environment, and we're looking for the bad, you know, and we're giving our customers an active response environment to actually go in there and try to drill down from a forensics and really build and enforce their policy from that structure as well. Ed? So, next slide. Oh, thank you. Go back one, sorry. So as I said before, we bring across all the data points across from every angle that we see. When we're looking at URLs, we're not looking at I want to block acme.com. We look at 1,600 points on that website. We download that website. We do dynamic classification. We're looking for backlinks. We're looking for embedded files. We're looking for ghost files. We're looking for stealth files. We're looking for anything that actually could execute and harm our customers. Not just looking at the URL itself, but looking at what the code base is in that file as well. File detection as well. We're really looking at different threat vectors within a file. Unpacking a file and actually looking to see if there's something else embedded is probably more beneficial than just trying to say that I whitelist and blacklist files. And on the email side, we do the same structure. We look across every level that we have today. So when we look at an email, we're looking at files, we're looking at URLs, we're looking at what's embedded in the head of the body, etc. But we're also looking at where it's coming from and how it's coming from. And our global intelligence is in real time, so we're always constantly building on this. Again, with IPs, we do the same thing. We're not just looking at a stagnant IP address. We're really trying to actually build behavior around that IP address. How does that IP address actually activate anything in the future? So we're looking at it from, it could be a future potential for a botnet environment, down to actually just trying to figure out a big picture that we're getting a DDoS happening. But again, Sheriff literally works as a global sandbox environment. Other vendors have the scenario where they sandbox the Pacifics. We actually sandbox everything. So we're looking at everything in real time and across a global network. So many years ago, we used to have a lot of vendors talking about follow the sun. Today, iSheriff just follows you. And that I think is more important than just trying to follow regional environments. Next, please. So let's open it up to some Q&A. And I think we've already had some questions come in. And Eric, I'll throw that over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Oscar. We've got a number of questions. And for those of you who want to continue asking questions, use the question box over to the right. So a couple of questions on the FBI. If this is a crime, why isn't the FBI arresting people?
Well, that's a good point. In most cases, the FBI really can't backtrack enough. They can get to a certain level with the data they have, but we really have it to a level where it's petty crime to a certain point. So, for example, I'm not going to mention names, but you know, we saw a couple of weeks ago nearly 3,000 users attacked globally. And this happened not on our networks, but we saw it because we actually harvest them around the world. The FBI probably only got 2 to 3 of those claims. They didn't see the entire attack. So because they don't see the entire attack, they have limited resources when it comes to looking at a certain amount of data. So when you're only looking at a $20 attack, you know, do you really go after that, or do you go after the big fish, right?
At what point should you get the FBI involved when you've had an attack?
I would recommend that anything that is really a distributed attack, and what I mean by that is, if you're just having one machine and you're able to actually take out the source file that actually has attacked you, one, send that directly to the FBI. They have a page that allows you to upload that to them. And two, if you feel it's, you know, they've breached another level of your personal privacy, I would probably contact them and give them as much information as possible. But what we are seeing is, you know, customers that have really been completely wiped out are the ones that are actually bringing them in, whereas the small-time attacks are really just notifying them. And I would try to notify them even on a small environment just to give them a heads up so they keep seeing the patterns and what's happening.
A couple of you have mentioned on this presentation that this is a small business problem. What is it that the larger businesses do that makes them less of a target?
Well, I think, and Chris, you can answer this after me. We've spoken to some very large customers too, and I think they're having the problem as well. The only difference is they have more layers of combating what's going on. And I think the organized crime are trying to stay under the radar. They're not trying to go after the Coca-Colas of the world because that just draws too much attention. Chris, you want to put some insight into that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to a few of them, and they basically say yes, they see it, but a lot of times they only, a PC will be hit, and only the local disk will be encrypted, or even only a few files. So what they have is they have really good backups. They have endpoint. They're doing user behavior analytics to look at what's going on at the individual endpoints. They have network behavior analytics to see what the kind of traffic is. They're also looking for suspicious traffic that you would see when large numbers of files are suddenly being encrypted. They can compare that to whether or not that user or that device has previously encrypted it, and they can stop, quarantine, or in some cases honeypot that in order so they can constrain it. They can simulate the environment and make it look like the exploit is successful, and then track it back to the attackers. So they not only have the ability to detect it and stop it in the early stages, but they also have the ability to go after the attackers and to fingerprint and identify those attackers. And they're quite happy to supply that information either to other people in their community and to not only local but federal and even international law enforcement. So that goes back to Oscar's statement that they're not anxious to draw the attention of the international law enforcement community to them, even though Bitcoin does allow them to get paid in a highly anonymous way.
A couple of you mentioned that these attacks are getting smarter. What does that mean for someone trying to protect their network?
Yeah, so maybe I could jump in on that one. A good example is look at Locky. We've already seen nearly 18,000 variants of it. And one of the points that we've seen that just is growing out of control is it's so targeted now that you'll have the same variant copycat as Locky, and it might have 16,000 different variants on its own. So you're never going to see that exploit ever happen again because they were singly targeting out one person within an organization. And the pattern and the behavior of the attack is so singular. So we're seeing that that's happening. I don't know whether that, in a lot of ways, from what I've seen so far, I wouldn't say that's organized crime in some ways. I've started to see that in a lot of ways it's a guy who has picked up a copy of Locky and thinks he can make a buck. So sometimes I think we overstate the organized crime piece, which is strong, but we are starting to see more individual attacks that are happening from an individual type of attacker, not really targeting hundreds and hundreds of machines. And if you're targeting a single machine and all you're asking for is $20, I don't think it is a mass scale type environment. Chris, unless you're seeing something else.
No, the only thing that is, the way that they're using more sophisticated malware that evades detection, and they're building ransomware toolkits that allow pretty uneducated criminals to execute ransomware attacks. The other aspect is that, as we pointed out in the enterprise, yeah, they catch the attack after only a few files or only a local disk has been encrypted. So no great harm and certainly no reason to pay the ransom. So what they're going after is they're going after the backups. They're going after the network attached backups. They're going after the cloud backups. So now it gets real interesting. You basically think, I had it backed up to the cloud. I'm a problem. I encrypted my cloud backup. I'm okay. Wrong. Unless you physically detached or somehow air-gapped the backups, they're increasingly vulnerable. So it's a three-dimensional expansion in terms of the capabilities of the malware, in terms of the backups, and in some cases in disabling the endpoint, disabling the backup, and so they're becoming much more sophisticated. So back to you, Oscar.
Yeah, Eric, any more questions?
Yeah, let me throw in a related question. If you pay the ransom, doesn't that mean that you'll be a target later because you've been identified as a payer?
Well, I would suggest no, because the last thing they want to do is be hitting the same customer over and over again. It just draws too much attention, and we haven't seen the similar attack happen on the same customers ever. And one thing about Sheriff, because we have our global neural platform, we get to see the same customer who has been hit. They're attempting to hit them again and again from other angles, and 100% of the time it's not the same attack and it's not the same region, etc. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't say that would happen.
So here's a question probably for you, Oscar. Do you have a product or service offering that can block the server contact or infection in the first place?
Yeah, so Sheriff, like I said before, does dynamic modeling, and the way Sheriff works, it'll allow maybe an email to get through for whatever reason, because it's so early day, and if it doesn't have any type of categoristics to block, we might let it through. But the moment it tries to execute or pull down a payload, we'll actually model that and block it at the source, or we'll block it at the endpoint. So we'll still block the malicious source, and we'll also block the payload. So you got to keep in mind that we go into a lot of customers that have the greatest and the best of breed and everything else. The main issue today is none of these products speak to each other, and because they don't. You don't have you don't have plan A, B, and C. You've just got plan A. So I think with Sheriff, it literally becomes an umbrella solution for you.
Here's one more technical question while I have you, Oscar. If a user doesn't have admin rights, how does the malware encrypt system files and make registry changes?
Well, in most cases, it's actually looking for that. So when it does do the targeted attack, it's actually looking for the admin rights. And the other problem that it's without the admin rights, you can't do the registry. But the realities are they're not just looking for the registry; they're looking for how do I get through to any other thing on that network, on that machine. So there could be a plain text password that's saved on Google Chrome. And they're now going to log on Salesforce for you, or they'll log on to something else. So this is how sophisticated they're getting. So I think we're moving to that direction. When we don't really care, they don't really care about the OS anymore. They don't care about those type of scenarios. They care about the application. They care about the data structures, right?
Okay, that brings us to the end of our time. There have been a couple of questions about getting a recording of the webinar, which will be sent to all of you in the next day or so in a follow-up email. John, do you have any final words of wisdom?
I do not. Just thank you so much for attending today. We appreciate your time, and if you'd like to reach out and find out more about iSheriff or Chris and IDC, you have the contact info in front of you, and we welcome the opportunity to help you.